Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's Binding of Isaac Bootcamp. Today we will be covering the standard selection of bosses whose main hunting grounds are the caves 1 and 2. These are Fistula, Gurdy, Peep and Chub. First on the list is Fistula, aka Meatball, and his appearance is very much loyal to that name as he resembles a giant stitched together ball of meat and flesh. Fistula's strength doesn't lie in any sort of ability he will attack the player with, rather he is more reactive in the way he dishes out damage. The more tears you spam at him, the more likely you are to take a hit or two in return. He achieves this by splitting after taking a certain amount of damage, and the 4 mini fistulas he splits into will also split into another 2 even smaller fistula each, resulting in a possible total 8 fast moving mini fistula on the screen at any one time, which can be incredibly tricky to dodge, as with each division the resulting fistula gets a little bit faster, all bouncing off both the walls and one another. When the smallest forms of fistula are destroyed, they spawn a charger upon their death location, which just adds to the laundry list of stuff you have to dodge in this fight. When fighting this boss, it is advisable to split it into 4, pick one of the 4 mini fistula that spawn from it, split that, deal with the fistula it spawns and then the chargers, before moving back up to the second of the 4 originals, and repeat ad nauseum until the whole lot have been cleared up. This makes the fight a little more controlled, in that you won't have a ridiculous amount of entities bouncing around the screen at one time, so your dodging skills won't be quite as tested. Fistula has a champion version, which appears slightly darker than the regular one, and this form will split into 3 mini fistula rather than the previous 4, and when its smallest form is destroyed, it will not spawn a charger, but instead will spawn a boom fly. These flies can be used to wipe out multiple mini fistula or other boom flies at once with their explosions, and a well-timed chain reaction can wipe the floor with this champion boss. Fistula will also appear in rooms between the caves and Sheol, spawning as 2 mini fistula in the caves and the depths, whilst it will appear as the fully fledged boss in the womb and Sheol. Upon death, Fistula drops the standard set of stat up items. Next we have Gurdy, aka the Pile, who I considered a personal Everest of mine when I started playing the Binding of Isaac, as without knowing how to deal with her, she really can be an incredibly tough boss to face down. Upon entering Gurdy's boss room, she will usually be surrounded by a couple of boils and a few flies, and I would advise that throughout the fight clearing up boils should be a major priority for you, as leaving them to grow to their full size and start spitting all over the place can send way more damage your way than you can usually handle. You may want to spend a few bombs when you enter the room as well, as Gurdy's boss room is usually characterised by a few rocks placed near the bottom left or bottom right corners of the room, which will protect the boils Gurdy spawns there from your tears, which is potentially frustrating once they start spitting and you need to get uncomfortably close to them to stop them doing so. Gurdy's first ability is telegraphed by her drawing her head into her body, which will then reappear either to the left of her flesh pile, the right, or to the bottom, depending on where the player is standing, and she will then launch 5 bloodshots in a sort of shotgun spread towards the player, which is best avoided either by being light on your toes and darting between the blood, or tempting Gurdy into firing in one direction and then rushing over to another in order to avoid the spread altogether, though this is usually dependent upon a decent speed stat. Gurdy also summons a few flies now and again, which will gradually drift towards the player and should be mopped up quickly to avoid being overwhelmed. Gurdy will also occasionally summon a pooter, which will spit blood at your character and can be a pain to take out without any sort of piercing effect, because they do have a tendency to hide behind Gurdy whilst they fire, using her as a sort of fleshy shield. Gurdy's third ability shows itself when her head goes to the top of her body. She raises her arms and summons a pair of boils, either to the bottom left and right of the screen or in front of her body. As mentioned before, these should be taken out quickly before they reach full size, and whilst this can be frustrating because she has a tendency to repeatedly summon them, you still need to be doing it because it really is going to make moving around a hell of a lot easier. Due to Gurdy's total lack of mobility, it is advisable to throw a few bombs at her over the course of the entire fight, as she has a high HP pool which needs to be whittled down, and it will help in taking out the monsters she spawns to fight alongside her as well. You can also position yourself above the boss and continually fire on her from there, pausing only to dodge the shots from the pooter, as her boils will spawn below her, and so it'll only be the odd stray shot that will reach you all the way up there. If you happen to have a high damage stat going into this fight, it should be considerably easier for you, as this makes clearing up the summoned monsters and burning through Gurdy's considerable HP a much less complicated affair. Gurdy also has a champion version, who is a darker version of the original. This variation doesn't spit blood and will be constantly spawning a variety of flies and boils, so dodging becomes less of a priority and you want to be mainly focusing on cleaving through all of the monsters she summons in order to get the required hits in on the boss herself. Gurdy, once again, drops the standard stat up items. Next is PP, also known as Slug Boy or Pisser. You'll want to be taking a little bit of range from this boss during the fight, as dodging is going to be something you'll be doing with some regularity, and giving yourself space to do this in is absolutely vital. PP's first ability is a 360 circular spray of urine shot out in all directions. Depending on whether you fight PP in a room with an abundance of rocks to hide behind or in a completely open one, you will either be best served by taking cover from this spray or dodging between it. His second ability sees him launching up into the air, only to drop down on the location he last saw the player in after a few short seconds. However, whilst in the air, PP cannot move over rocks, so you can use this to your advantage by placing cover between yourself and him, so that you can stay in around the same location whilst you avoid having the guy landing on you. His third ability is telegraphed by a very satisfied look on PP's face, as he creates a glowing puddle of yellow urine around himself, which will dissipate after around 5 or 6 seconds. This puddle is dangerous to the touch, so you should avoid walking on it, and really this should be a non-issue, as it only appears in his immediate vicinity, and you shouldn't really be standing that close at all. So only really concern yourself with this if he launches himself into the air immediately after spawning it, and you are then required to move around the room. At both 66% and 33% of his total HP, PP will lose an eyeball, which you would imagine to be a detriment to the boss's fighting ability, but in fact, these eyeballs will move diagonally around the room, doing half a heart's worth of damage if they run into you, or 1 whole heart's worth of damage if you are in the womb or beyond. So the crux of this fight really is in the dodging. There is a fair bit you're going to have to be moving for, as PP really does enjoy his 360 spray attack, and when you add the eyeballs to the mix, you really do need to focus on your movement heavily. You will hopefully have a high tier stat going into this, as you really need to make the most of any opportunity you have to unload on the boss. Bombs can be used when the boss is sat in one place to help take out some of that HP, but be cautious when doing this, as it can take out precious rocks which can act as cover. If you have either the Spider's Bite pickup or the High Priestess tarot card, this fight is pretty much trivial, as a hit from the High Priestess card will take a ridiculous chunk of his HP out, and if it takes him from above 66% HP to below 33% in a single hit, only 1 eyeball will be present for you to dodge. The Spider's Bite massively nerfs his launch ability, as regardless of rock placement in the room, if PP launches into the air whilst under the effects of the Spider Bite, he will land again at the same location he launched from, removing any need to dodge the attack. PP has 2 champion versions, a green version which behaves exactly the same as the original, but you will start the fight with both eyes already floating around the room, and a yellow version who is smaller than the standard one but will constantly produce a puddle of urine underneath its body, even whilst mid-air, so this can prove annoying as it reduces the space you have to dodge his other attacks. Upon death, PP drops the standard stat up items. Finally we come to Chub, or Mr. Maggot, a giant maggot with a simple set of abilities, and one weakness which reminds me a great deal of Dondongo from the Ocarina of Time. Chub's primary attack is a charge, which will cause him to speed towards you if you step into his line of sight, inflicting a whole heart's worth of damage. This is incredibly easy to move out of the way of in time, provided you aren't stepping directly in front of him when he uses it, and dropping a bomb on the ground in front of him whilst he is in the charging state will cause him to eat said bomb, become stunned for a moment, and then explode at the cost of around 1/5 of his total HP, so if you do have the spare bombs, this would be the time to use them. Chub also occasionally spawns a charger to fight with him, on top of the handful which usually appear when you first enter the room, so you should make sure to clear some of these up to give yourself the necessary space to move around, and bear in mind that any chargers in the path of Chub's charge will instantly be killed. Now, whilst Chub is a simplistic fight, he does have a little bit of variety when it comes to his champion versions, and also has an odd associated bug, where champions will take on attributes of 2 different colours in one boss. The first variation is Blue, who will be a larger version of the boss, be more resistant to the knockback effect of your tears, and will travel at a slower pace. Instead of spawning chargers, this guy will be summoning boils for your entertainment, and as with Gurdy, it is advisable to clear these up as soon as they appear. The next champion is Green, who has one difference in terms of what he spawns, summoning Spitties instead of chargers, who are similar in their appearance but do not charge, and instead spit randomly in front of themselves every now and again. The orange champion is a smaller version of the regular Chub, who has received a significant speed upgrade and seems to alter his course far more fluidly when hit by your tears, which can make him quite unpredictable and difficult to dodge if you're pelting him with tears whilst he attacks. Speed upgrades are a definite boon for an encounter with this particular champion. There is also a red variation on Chub, but that is considered an entirely separate boss, so I'll leave discussion on that for another video. Chub can also appear as a sub-boss in the caves levels onwards, and there is a very useful bug you can use in the rooms he appears in to trivialise your fight. If you bomb open the door, or bomb your way through to the secret room, you can tempt Chub to charge into the opening, and he will become permanently stuck there, unable to avoid or react to your attacks. However, bear in mind that in this state you can only finish him off with another bomb, so if you only have one bomb left with which to open the door, this isn't a tactic you want to go for. Upon death, he drops the standard fare of stat-up items. And that is it for today's Binding of Isaac Bootcamp on the standard caves bosses. I hope that you've picked up some helpful tips and tricks for facing these guys, and that this has maybe even helped you to up your game. I'll see you guys soon.